Hi, I'm Dan Egan.
And I'm Father Greg.
Join us for our new show right here on Catholic TV.
Why We Worship.
It's coming straight at you.
In order to appreciate the Mass in all its beauty, there's a couple terms that we have to become familiar with. The lamb that was sacrificed was something that was reserved for God. It was the best sheep in their flocks, and yet that would be the one that would save them. Now, wouldn't it be great if there were such a vehicle of God's grace and favor? Today, there is one. It's the Mass.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Why We Worship. I'm Dan Egan.
I'm Father Greg.
And we're so excited to be back here on Catholic TV and our new special on Advent, The Journey to Bethlehem.
Dan, it's really exciting. There's a really important time of year that the Church calls Advent that commemorates the biggest event. It's something we have to prepare for because it's so big.
You know, it's so exciting, and of course, hanging out with you, Father, is a theological lesson every time we talk. We're going to learn so much about the characters here in Advent, how to prepare for Advent, and how God works through human events.
He does, Dan. And you know, speaking of God working through human events, all the events in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, are kind of leading up to the coming of Christ. And so to delve into that is such an enriching experience. I've loved it, not only as a priest, just as your average Christian.
And of course, all of these readings here in the Word, we're so familiar with this season, but for me, in this season and in this show, they're becoming so much more real.
That's right, Dan. And the big event that's commemorated in all the churches throughout the world, it's got a very particular nuance in Bethlehem today. There's an opening ceremony to start the Advent preparation where the first Advent candle's lit in the Church of the Nativity, and all the other churches throughout the Holy Land share the flame from that same candle.
That's awesome. Of course, we're connected all through the coming of Christ. And what you've pointed out to me is that this is really the beginning of the liturgical calendar. And how does that end? And when does it end?
Well, the Church has its own year. And so the beginning of Advent is like liturgical New Year's Day. And the end of the Church's year is the Feast of Christ the King. And so that's very interesting. Christ coming in glory is the end, is how all time ends. And so that little understanding of the Church's flow of time is key to our unlocking the mystery of Advent.
And we're so glad that you're watching, because in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to break down Advent in a really special way. We're going to look at what the popes through the years have said about Advent, and we're going to learn about the different popes and what they've enlightened us and how they lead us in Advent. And of course, we're going to talk about the family, your home life, how to best prepare, some of the best practices for preparing for Christ.
And this is where our journey begins, Dan. Come with us on our journey to Bethlehem, right here on Why We Worship.
Hi, I'm Dan Egan.
And I'm Rainey Schwartz.
And this is Extreme Faith.
A view from the pew.
Rainey, it sure is fun each week sitting down exploring our faith together. And you know what I say? Come to Mass, there's room in the pew for you.
The one who walks the earth is never as strong as the one in your heart. And Dan, if people want to reach us, they can reach us at SoundCloud.com at Extreme Faith Podcast, and also on Twitter at Extreme Faith Pod.
And you can always log on to ExtremeFaithPodcast.com. So we'll see you next time on Extreme Faith.
A view from the pew.
Welcome back to our Why We Worship Advent series, The Journey to Bethlehem.
And of course, Father, we're good Catholics, so often we don't open the Bible. We wait to hear it in Mass. And in this first show, our first series on Advent, we have to talk about the core Advent event of the week is the Annunciation.
It's the first Advent, Dan. And, you know, in the Church, we celebrate Advent for 4 weeks before Christmas. Well, the first one, to tell the truth, lasted, the 9 months, went from when Mary conceived Jesus to when he was born.
And of course, you can find that in the Bible, in Luke. First Luke, in chapter 26, talks about the Annunciation, Father.
It does. And, you know, I can't emphasize how unique that experience is. I mean, angels, okay?
Tell me about angels.
Angels. You know, they're God's messengers, but they are truly great beings. They're so much greater than we are, Dan. I think, my theology professor said, if we were to run into an angel and he wouldn't disguise like when they appear in the Bible as a farmer, like Saint Raphael, we'd think they were God.
Yeah, you've been telling me that these are just magnificent beings that if we ever bumped into an angel revealed to us, we would be in awe and think that we were meeting God Himself.
That's right. And so you have to see almost the irony of, let's say, God's angel who got the gig, right? Who got the job to bring His message personally to a little girl in Nazareth. He comes and tells her, "Hail, full of grace." That greeting is one of respect that an angel usually wouldn't show towards a lower creature.
I mean, you would have thought that Mary would have been really scared at this moment to see something so big and so awesome as Gabriel, the angel.
Yeah, well, probably she was intimidated, at least by the message, if not by the appearance. Who knows how the angel manifested himself to the Virgin Mary, but understandably, in a way she could handle at the moment.
So, that's also what I found really exciting was how not only did the angel address her humbly and hail, but she goes into action herself.
She does. Right after the Annunciation, the most stunning thing is that Mary doesn't start getting worried about being the mother of the long-awaited Messiah, one that was foretold for already a couple thousand years, like we'd expect she would be. But right off the bat, she gets on a mule and goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth because she's in need. So, or at least the angel told her so, right?
Right, so she goes immediately into action. She goes into God's will to serve others.
That's, I think, revealing of the inner richness of Mary. You see, no one was more prepared for the first Advent than she was because, well, God's coming. But in a sense, she was most prepared to receive Him, not only in her womb, but also in her heart, because of her response of charity was immediate. I'm just going to think about others, as we always count upon the Blessed Virgin Mary doing.
It's so powerful to see just how prepared Mary was in her own spiritual life. Her house was in order for this to happen.
Her house in order in more than one way, you could say, right? I'm sure it was clean swept and everything. But we know the external order is a reflection of the internal order. And so that's why the church has such a great devotion towards Mary, because when the angel addressed her as the one full of grace, now that's a unique title. The one that's completely pleasing to God. And everybody knew, well, we messed it up. We're all sinners. The Jews had their Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, during the year to make up for all their mess-ups. But when the angel called her full of grace, he was saying something extremely special. You, among all women, are different because God has favored you and blessed you in a certain way from the beginning that you won't be able to fathom.
So it's week 1 of Advent, the Annunciation, and next up on Why We Worship, we're going to tell you a little bit more about what the popes have said through the ages on Advent.
Welcome back to the Why We Worship Advent series, Journey to Bethlehem. It's so great to look at what recent popes have said about Advent. Every week we're going to have a little segment where we look at what they've said, what they've contributed to our understanding of Advent. Now, for several years I had the grace to live in Rome. It's wonderful. But for someone who hasn't been there, it's kind of hard to describe the spiritual experience of going to a papal audience, or even just one of his more informal speeches. Let's say the Angelus message on Sunday at midday. With all the sights and smells of the ancient city, you have this sense that I'm being spoken to by the Vicar of Christ. And what he says, I can really fall back on. This is spiritually sound. I mean, truth be told, if anyone's going to know what he's talking about, it's the head of the church. It's the representative of Christ himself. So we're going to have a few of these tidbits to nourish our souls upon. Now, Advent has its own vocabulary to start off with. There's these words that keep coming up again that help us to, let's say, position ourselves. We find hope, journey, preparation, waiting, coming. All those words imply either movement or a preparation for something important. So to start off with one pope, Pope Benedict XVI of recent memory, he says something very important about the coming part of it. The word Advent, he says, it means coming or presence. The very word, huh? In the ancient world, this word meant a visit of the king or the emperor to a province. Now, in Christian language, it refers to the coming of God. It refers to his presence in the world. It's a mystery that embraces the entire cosmos and history. Now, he's getting pretty big on us here. But it has two culminating events. And that's interesting because we think it just refers to the preparation for Christmas. You know, I'm baking the cookies, putting the ornaments on the Christmas tree, and of course getting myself in the spiritual mode. But there's another coming. The first and second coming of Jesus Christ. The first refers to his incarnation, which is Christmas, right? The first refers to the incarnation, which is what we celebrate at the end in Christmas. The second is his glorious return at the end of time. This is why Advent is par excellence a season of hope in which believers in Christ are invited to remain in watchful and active waiting, nourished by prayer and by the effective commitment to love one another. Now you think about that for a second. The second coming is what we probably don't think of too often, but it's true. Christ is going to come again. He came once as man. That's Jesus Christ, born in Bethlehem. But he's going to come again. And so Advent has a perennial value for us. In other words, we're always in a sort of Advent. We're always in a sort of waiting for Christ to come. We got to be ready for him to come, not only at Christmas, but at the end of our time, at the end of our lives. We will go before him in judgment. And what's intriguing is how Pope Benedict speaks of Advent as the coin with the two sides, the two comings. The second one, which we haven't thought of too much. But our remembering and celebrating the first gets us ready for the second one. So, years earlier now, we're going to another pope, Saint John Paul II, right, recently canonized. Now, he had the same idea, but using a different word for preference, the word journey, making us think of the walk through life. So here it goes. Precisely by this adventus, using the Latin form of the word Advent, which means coming, God comes to man. And this is a fundamental dimension of our faith. That sounds pretty big. What's that mean? Well, the whole thought, the whole reality that God's coming to be with us, that's front center in what we believe and how we live our faith as Christians. He goes on to clarify that a little better. We live our faith when we're open to God's coming, when we persevere in Advent. And there we go. Now we're starting to hear a little bit of what Pope Benedict said. Advent is evergreen, so to speak. We're always in that sense of being open to God coming to be with us. So that's a very valuable little piece of advice for daily life. Am I living my day open to God? And so it's not just some thought, some nice little consoling saying that it's always Christmas. There's a lot more reality to that than we think. And so these segments here on the popes are really excellent because they're part of the church's centuries-long patrimony of commentary upon those fundamental truths of our faith. And so it's only right that we claim what is ours.
Welcome back here to Why We Worship, our Advent series, a journey to Bethlehem. And Father, it's great to talk about these historical events in the Bible, but in reality, my life's busy. I got a lot to do here. I mean, Thanksgiving just ended, and I got to get the lights up, the tree, the wreaths, and you want me to get ready for Christ at the same time? There's a lot going on.
You got to buy the presents too.
I got to buy, I need yours.
Anyhow, it's both and, Dan. You know, imagine we come slamming into Christmas Eve. We finally got the lights up and plugged in, but we're on the inside, we're frazzled, right? We're not ready to be silently contemplating the newborn Christ at the manger side. And so that's why the church has given us this time to do that. On the inside, we got to prepare. We got to put the lights up in our heart. So we got to do both. That's the challenge.
And of course, that's what this show is all about, trying to prepare you better for the coming of Christ. And in this segment, we're going to talk about the best practices for your family and getting ready and kind of getting through the clutter of the season so that our hearts are better prepared for the coming.
Well, you know, Dan, the church tells us, and with its rich symbolism, how to get ready for that. For example, the color that the priest wears during Mass in Advent is violet, purple. And so what's the meaning of that color? It's penance. It's kind of like Lent, indeed. In some places, in some countries, it's called like a mini Lent. Because what? You're getting stuff in order. Whenever you're preparing for a big event, you run a tight ship.
And,
right?
and of course, I mean, and with Mass, every week we start with repenting.
Exactly. And, you know, in many quarters, at least in older epochs, the time of Advent was one of fasting as well. That's sort of getting myself ready, because by physically imposing discipline, my soul is better prepared and focused.
It's there's a lot to do, and so that's why it makes this so important to prepare as a family and to make it really about our everyday lives and how God works through those events.
Exactly. And so that's why in these upcoming moments of best practices that we're going to share with everybody, we're going to start talking about those great things you can do together as a family, besides for getting all the lights up around the house, to also spiritually prepare for the coming of Christ.
And of course, we've talked about so many of these great practices to get your family and yourself ready. And one of the easiest ones, of course, is always my favorite: read the Bible, study some of the Gospels, and reread with your family these events.
Exactly. You know, one thing I remember doing actually in my religion class as a kid, was, you know, the Jesse tree. I think in some traditions it's drawing the family tree of Jesus and kind of appreciating, oh wow, all these people in salvation history, many of them we're familiar with, you know, King David and his father Jesse, of course, where it starts from, and all leading down to baby Jesus and his mother Mary and St. Joseph. It's exciting.
And he's coming, and it won't be long. And as I get the lights on the roof and get everything decorated in the yard, we're also getting ready. And you've talked about this many, many times. One of the best ways to get ready is one of the simplest, with the manger.
Yeah. Such a simple recollection of that first nativity scene is often enough to keep it in my mind. During the day, I'm able to remember, oh, why am I doing all this preparation? If I remember the why, it's going to come much more naturally, and I'll be spiritually ready.
And coming up in our next segment, it's all about the manger and preparation for Christ.
Welcome to our segment on Advent best practices. I remember as a little kid, my mom and I would set up the nativity scene in our dining room. All those little statuettes of the figures of the individuals that were traditionally there at Christ's birth, at that first Christmas in Bethlehem. Now, it's important to know where that tradition came from. I mean, setting up little statuettes has to have its origins. Well, back in the 1200s, St. Francis of Assisi thought that the Christian faithful should be more acquainted with that scene of Christ's birth that's depicted in the Gospel of Luke. So what to do? He gets the oxen and the mules and live animals, sets up a stable so that people could come by and see, oh, it was like that. So that was the first manger scene, the first nativity that's depicted. And ever since then, has been part of the church's tradition. So we can get acquainted, visually related to what little Jesus was born in. So it's a beautiful tradition to set up the nativity scene at the beginning of Advent without baby Jesus there. You have Mary and Joseph and shepherds and stuff, but we save little Jesus for that Christmas night when he first comes. And so there's a sense of, oh, the manger scene's ready, but Christ hasn't come yet. And so for your family, it's a great sense of anticipation to see it almost complete. I remember as well, since we celebrate the Epiphany on January 6th or thereabouts, that's when the three kings, Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, traditionally came to worship Christ following that star of Bethlehem. Well, since they came later, we would have their journey depicted by having them march closer to the manger scene as Advent went by. So, first Sunday of Advent, they'd start off several feet away from the little manger, and they'd make their way closer and closer in increments. It's also a way of participating in the anticipation of Christ's birth. So, along with that simple practice, tell me your Advent best practice if you have any at fatherg@whyweworship.com. Let's bring these to our friends, to our neighbors, learn from the church's great wealth of tradition in preparing for Christ's birth.
It's the journey to Bethlehem right here on Why We Worship on Catholic TV. Father, this has been a great show for me. I mean, there's just so much to think about, and there's so much that we want to share with you to get ready for this amazing journey to Bethlehem.
I feel like we've only started to scratch the surface. So much wealth of symbolism is wrapped into the church's Advent preparation. We're starting to unpack it. And in the upcoming shows, we're going to talk about the Advent wreath, which is that central symbol that we often look at. It's one right behind us right here, and among other things.
Yes, and of course, you know, and it was great. I love the way you got the family ready with the manger and moving the wise men closer each week to the manger. I think that's just so great and so simple, and a great way to remind people that Christ is coming.
It is, Dan. The little things are such reflections of the bigger scheme of things, which is our spiritual journey, our life. And so we can't throw the symbols out the window. Those are important. And just like the Christmas lights on the tree, those are important because it's like all of nature is dressing up, so to speak, for Christ coming.
And it's impressive. I mean, whenever I think of Mary, I'm impressed how this little girl could withstand just even seeing the great angel and understanding and comprehending and moving into action. I mean, the way you described that has really blown me away.
It's a theme, Dan, that the church has spent many, many centuries praying about, contemplating about. The church fathers have written so much about that wondrous moment of the incarnation. I'd like to talk more about it if we get the chance.
Hey, we have to. And of course, we've been learning about what the popes have said. And one of the things you said earlier in the show was really that there's 2 Advents.
Yeah. All of time is bookended by the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And to think that we have the grace of being between both of them, right? Being born in the New Testament, that's wondrous and something worth reflecting about a lot.
And I know in my own life so many times I'm wanting to hear what to do next. You know, the great question, what's God's will for my life? And here in the Advent story, we have these characters listening, they've been prepared, and then acting on what they're being told.
You know, it's not by accident that the gospel writers, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, wrote down the different reactions of the different players, so to speak, in the whole narrative, so that we might take those life lessons and make them our own.
And of course, as we continue here on Why We Worship, we're going to explore more of these amazing characters in these true life events in the Gospels, and we're going to explore how they heard God's calling and how they prepared for Advent and the coming of Christ.
You know, just the prophets are tremendous in their utterances. Prophet Isaiah, he speaks of, you know, albeit in a very, you know, oblique way, he speaks of the virgin that will be with child, right? About 1,000 years before this moment. And so just knowing that is a kind of a sign of God's meticulous planning in this great drama of the salvation of the world.
So, Father, isn't the next week all about the visitation?
It is, Dan, and that's a very special moment because Mary's cousin, we could say, St. Elizabeth, is pregnant with the last great prophet. St. John the Baptist is the bridge between the Old and the New Testament, so to speak.
And I love it. You've unpacked John the Baptist for me in a really special way here on Why We Worship, the Advent series. And Father, I'm excited, and I hope all of you will join us each week as we get prepared for Christmas right here on Catholic TV on Why We Worship.